party, es buena sensación. Psychedelic party, eso sí es el soul. Psychedelic party, toda confusión. Psychedelic party, es alucinación. Psychedelic party, tú cada vez te vas. Psychedelic party, un poquito más. Psychedelic party, todo es el amor. Psychedelic party, como el del Señor. Psychedelic party, es buena sensación. Psychedelic party, eso sí es el soul. Psychedelic party, toda confusión. Psychedelic party, es alucinación. Psychedelic party, tú cada vez te vas.
Part of your dream is to be a politician. Now, I also know that you have a role that is, that you've just gone full-time in. And I want you to tell me how this relates to your future.
Thank you, Pat. And that's actually an excellent question. Because my new job, same as the old job, but it's full-time instead of part-time. How many people are in a union here? Nobody except for me. My job is a union job. I work at Palmer House Hilton. I do the coffee service. We get gratuity. It's a great union job that pays a lot of money. It's part-time, not full-time. What does it have to do with politics? The fact is my union is one of the most activist unions in the city. Unite Here Local 1. They volunteer for candidates. They'll knock on doors. So what I've decided to do on video tapes, I decided in my hotel to be a union organizer. Every department has one. I need to get more involved with the union. Not only to help my fellow employees, but possibly down the road for the union to help me. Some of you know that I wanted to run for alderman. I gave a few speeches on it. But before I decided, I called my union and I said, hey, would you guys be interested in backing me up, helping me run for alderman to get a progressive right downtown? And basically, although they were very encouraging and they told me to give them some time to think about it, in the end, they backed off just because they probably realized the odds were not that great and they maybe weren't sure of my potential, even though I'd run for it. So my plan is now get more involved, make money in my job, and a few years from now, where's the time? A few years from now, I will run.
I happen to know that you're a championship wrestler. Is that correct?
No.
Championship boxer. Thank you. Excuse me. Championship boxer. Because I'm so into sports, I understand these things. Okay. Championship boxer. Tell me about a fight that you weren't sure you could win, but you ended up winning it, and what it was that got you to that victory.
Okay. Well, the first time I fought competitively, it was exactly that kind of fight. I had trained for years just in the gym and was used to the routine of training in the gym. When I got to the ring in the actual fight, I saw the guy on the other side of the ring and realized he wants to hit me. Hurt me and maybe knock me out. I suddenly thought, how can I do this? And my heart started pumping and I started, it's like some of you feel when you have to get up here and give a presentation. You know that feeling? Nerves, that everyone's looking at me. And that's how I felt. I got there and he was looking at me. I just got in the ring and went into that mode where you start fighting and punching and performing. I won that fight, and at the end I wasn't even sure I won, but I just got in there, turned on the machine, and went. It was an amazing situation, and I was surprised how nervous I was. Even having prepared, having given all these speeches up here, being used to nervous situations, seeing that person with that look and those gloves coming at me, fortunately, I won, and I have a big championship belt. Thank you for asking.
What advice do you give to somebody who isn't particularly athletic but wants to be more of an athlete?
Thank you, Madam Toast, or actually Toastmasters. You ask such the most contemplating deep questions. So if you're not an athlete, what do you do? Before I had nephews, I really wouldn't know how to answer this question. I have two nephews. One is 5 and the other is 2. The 2-year-old takes after his auntie. He's athletically fine. The 5-year-old is like my sister, who's not. So basically, hopefully he'll, like to read and become a lawyer like she is. But of course, in my competitive nature, I want him to be athletic like his auntie. So basically, the first thing you should do is work on your coordination. So you have, like any sports whatsoever, anything that's physical comes down to hand and eye coordination. So basically, you can do this by just throwing the ball in the air with your dominant hand or even your less dominant hand, and really start very small on any type of physical trick with just simple mobility. So you can stand on one foot for 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, kind of build that up. Same thing with maybe throwing a ball in the air. A lot of times I would tell someone, have you ever tried juggling? Because that's a great way to build your hand-eye coordination. So start with 1 ball, then 2 balls, and 3 balls. And most likely, if you can build that up, you can apply that mobility to any type of physicality, which translates into sports. Because when it comes down to sports, it's really about hand-eye coordination, and therefore you will become an athlete, just like I was. Thank you.
So, what do you miss about home?
What do I miss about home? There's actually a lot of things that I miss about home, but the reason why I don't like winter, and it's because of the holidays. One thing that I miss the most is my family. So it's really sad. Every time I'm going to Christmas and it's Thanksgiving Day, I'm like, damn it, again. So I used to go back to Ukraine every Christmas, but then I realized it's cold over there too. Plus, I don't have car over there, so it's even worse than here because I can go to my car. So I stopped doing that. I'm like, Mom, I love you, but I'll come over next spring or summer. So, but now again, I feel it's Christmas time, and I'm like, I miss my families. That's the sad part.
Psychedelic party, un poquito más. Psychedelic party, todo es el amor.
Questions connect. So that's just a wonderful thing there. And you use my favorite 3-letter word. The word you. Use the you. Use the you in your speeches. You get up there, it's just a magical word. It helps connect, helps bring people in, helps get them involved, helps really think about and focus on your speech. And then finally, you had a story. And I know you had a story because there are 3 things every story has to have. Stories have to be known, seen, and heard. And you notice that Dan had some background. You understood a little bit about the situation. You could see the other person. He described that person very well. And there was somebody hurt. And you couldn't do more with the hurt. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. So the biggest question is, how do you develop, how do you grow this sort of a speak? And the first thing to remember is about that question. Whenever you ask a question, afterwards you have to pause to let people think about the question, or even be able to answer the question. Otherwise, you ask a question like this. Hey, how are you doing today? Oh, me great. Me too. How are things going? Fantastic. Hey, how's the light? Mine too. Fantastic. Really great talking. Let's do it again. You know people like that? Don't you just have conflict issues with them? Pause for the point. Pause for the point. Just long enough so people can answer. Or if people nod at you, nod back, even if there isn't any pause, it's okay, you're connected with the audience, it's all right. But if people look a little bit like, pause for the point. That helps a lot. And the other thing you do is to make sure things are heard as dialogue. The dialogue is simply back and forth conversation. That's where somebody says something, and somebody else replies. You can do external dialogue between people outside you, or you can do internal dialogue. Like, you're thinking about, man, I really hate my boss. On the other hand, maybe it's my fault. No, I'm definitely certain it's his fault. No, maybe it's me. He had some good points there. I really need to improve and develop my own self-confidence. No, it's him that's wearing me down. May sound a little crazy, but it's important to have dialogue back and forth because dialogue builds conflict. You want to grow the conflict. If you're ever telling a story, there's no conflict in it, you're telling a boring story. Tell stories that have conflict, that have difficulties, that have problems. One thing you notice that in Julia's speech, there was a conflict. She wanted to go ahead and do all these video games, but she couldn't do them. They were wrong to do it. She sort of went back and forth and back and forth. The humor, everything came out of that internal dialogue, back and forth, that grew that conflict and built that conflict. But the thing to remember is, if you're going out there, is you can overcome those limits with Dan's help, but you must have the courage to face your limits first.
Following up on Tim's ideas, the essence of making a good speech is connecting. And there are techniques for connecting with the audience. One that you used and Dan used was opening with a question. You also used the powerful technique of having a story. You added reflection when you said, what happens when there's rapid growth in a country? This increases connection. You even connected literally with the audience by having Pat and Dan answer questions. These were all parts of what makes a speech, anyone's speech, more meaningful to the audience as you pull in the audience. Now the room for growth would be to do things that increase connection even more. For example, your question, which is aimed at connecting, was how many of you think? Well, Craig Valentine, world champion speaker, the guru that Tim and I follow, says when you ask a question, use the hallway test. If you see, or if I see Tim in the hallway, I wouldn't say, Tim, how many of you think? I would say, do you think? Think of your audience as you. Do you think it's good to criticize another culture? So you might change your question into that form. Another way to connect with the audience is think of what the audience might have in their mind when you say something. For example, you said, we were invited to go to Korea, and we went. Well, as an audience member, I was thinking, who's we? I wasn't invited. Who's the we here? Now, I happen to know you're married and you have a business, but that's because I've heard you speak before. When you're giving a presentation, think, what might the audience think I'm trying to communicate? Similarly, you said at the end, I started a book project. Now this, I'd never heard of before, and I was thinking, what is a book project? Are you writing a book? Are you reading books and have a club? I don't know what a book project was. A way to connect with the audience is to put yourself in the position of the audience and then imagine, okay, what would they think when I said that? So these are some of the techniques that help increase connection, and of course, you want your talks to be meaningful by having increased connection. You're on your way, you have many of the elements, the reflection, the story, the opening question. Now introduce more connections can follow some of Tim's advice, some of the advice you heard from me, and the other connection devices you might hear about.
You and I spoke in the break. You asked me for 3 things. First off, looking at your actual presentation style, not necessarily what you were saying, how you were saying it. Second, if you had any annoying habits, anything that got on my nerves. And finally, the question that I think we all ask when we get up here, am I making sense? Good news, we've all had a bad boss. You make perfect sense. And much like your experience in the seminar you went to, all of us, when you start telling us about your bad boss or your bad coworker, I got it. I immediately thought of a particular individual, and I suspect all of us have had someone in our lives who we can immediately say, yeah, I relate to that. I know exactly where she's coming from. So in terms of that big question, I think the answer is a resounding absolutely. In terms of the how to present better, I want to focus on 3 areas. First off, vocal variety. One of the things that Alice shared with me was that this was an impromptu speech. She thought of it earlier today and decided to get up here and give a speech. She hadn't done it before. I think that with more practice speeches, vocal variety becomes more natural because you know where in the speech to emphasize a certain point. You think your story through a little bit more, and you know the part where you take a dramatic pause, you know where people are going to laugh. So to begin with, I think that vocal variety, just as you practice this speech more, will come naturally. When you're doing impromptu speeches in the future, just keep in mind that that's an area to remember on. Second, organization. When you got to your call to action, here I am going to give you these 3 steps, it became very organized. I knew exactly where you were going. Your physical directions became much more directive. Before that, it took 2 minutes and 51 seconds to get there. So over half of your speech was telling us the initial story about how you came to be standing here. So I think that can be shored up a little and will make the organization as a whole flow a bit more. You were also, in that piece, kind of fidgety. So there were a couple of times when I thought you were using a transition, and you moved, and I was like, okay, transition, but you were still in your story. So just keep that in mind too. If you need to transition, you totally do, but otherwise you can make use of this zone to continue telling your story. And I think that was also the annoying habit, the undirected movement. So that is the extent of what I have. Thank you so much for sharing your advice. I know that at least for me it certainly struck home, and I think I am going to use some of I wrote it down just so that I don't forget how to deal with the annoying coworkers in my life.
In your presentation, you said, I'm going to share this and share this. Stop sharing things with me. I want to know what I'm going to learn. What am I going to get out of it? And that's an effective speaking technique.
Psychedelic party como el del Señor.